Good afternoon. We are so pleased to welcome you all on this very special occasion for the School of Medicine. There's almost nothing more inspiring than being able to recognize incredibly talented faculty with endowed professorships like this. For one thing, we are so lucky to have the kind of talent at this medical center that is exemplified by Dr. Eric Leuthardt. Eric embodies everything that we look for in being a world-class leader in medical research and innovation. For another thing, we are so lucky to have donors within our community that create these professorships with their generosity and their belief in what we do here at this school. Dr. Leuthardt is joined today by his partner, Lee Earn Chen, his children, Ellie and Hunter, and his brother, Mark Leuthardt. I wonder if you all stand up so we can applaud the Leuthardt. We also have many of Eric's friends and colleagues who are here in the audience. What is it about neurosurgeons that can get us so many in the audience? And we are also live streaming this event. It's my understanding that we have many of his other colleagues joining us. It's a pleasure to have you all here live streaming. I want to acknowledge and extend a warm welcome to Chancellor Andrew Martin, who will join me shortly in bestowing a medallion to Dr. Leuthardt. And we are so lucky to have Dr. Ralph Dacey and his wife Corinne in the back over there with us for the event today. Ralph has played a central role in promoting Eric's career and the rest of our neurosurgery faculty. Let's have a round of applause for Ralph and Corinne. Before we continue, please allow me to share some of the legacy of Dr. Huang, the Huang Professorship, and the Department of Neurosurgery. Huang arrived in St. Louis in 1954 to further his medical education and train as a neurosurgeon at Washington University. Here he studied under the renowned neurosurgeon Henry G. Schwartz. After completing his training under Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Huang practiced as a highly regarded neurosurgeon in St. Louis and then later in Okinawa, Japan. In 1979, he returned to Taiwan to lead his family business, the Sanyang Industry Company. Even from a great distance, he never lost his connection to the university. Dr. Huang became Washington University's first international trustee and helped launch the International Advisory Council for Asia. His leadership as a trustee and key volunteer were pivotal in growing international partnerships for the university and led to significant growth in international student recruitment from Asia. Dr. Huang was honored by the university with a Distinguished Alumni Award in 1990 and with the Robert S. Brookings Award in 1992. The School of Medicine also presented him with a Second Century Award in 1993. An internationally prominent industrialist and WashU-trained neurosurgeon, Dr. Huang established this professorship in neurological surgery in 1993. We are immensely grateful for our partnership with Dr. Huang and his lasting impact on the university. Before I ask Dr. Zipfel to give the formal academic introduction, I want to say a few more words about Dr. Leuthardt. One of the best things about the job that I have is I get to hear work from the most talented medical and scientific minds in the world. But the unique combination that embodies Eric Leuthardt's career, basic neuroscience, engineering, and entrepreneurship, makes his impact almost singular. I actually find it hard to wrap my mind, you know how the mind works, around how Eric has developed the concepts and the skills that have led to his discoveries in terms of neural prostheses that allow motor expression from cognitions in patients who have experienced severe strokes, While he has advanced this area, he has, in truly remarkable ways, he more recently is working with Albert Kim on the use of laser technologies, improving treatments for gliomas and other brain tumors. It's hard to know how, and we are in immense awe of what you are doing, Eric. This kind of work has been the basis of several startup companies and a burgeoning career as an entrepreneur. I note here that Eric, according to his CV, I could be dated in saying this, is co-founder of at least 8 companies, including several that we would consider home runs for WashU in being located here in St. Louis, and he serves as a consultant for at least 6 others. And I'm sure this list is just scratching the surface of all that he has done in licensing of technologies. Eric, as I have become responsible for commercialization for the university, I am now trying to figure out how are we going to clone you. All kidding aside, I want you to know that this school, its leadership, and its supporting community who are here today deeply revere you, and we consider ourselves to be so lucky to be your fans. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Gregory Zipfel, the Ralph G. Dacey Distinguished Professor of Neurosurgery and Chair of the Department of Surgery, to give the formal academic introduction.
Thanks, Dr. Perlmutter. Thanks, Dr. Martin, for joining us today. And thanks for all of you coming to celebrate Dr. Leuthardt. This is a bit of a long time coming, and really glad the day has come. So, Eric, I'm really thrilled as your friend and colleague and collaborator to honor you today as the Huang Endowed Chair. This is going to be a very, very special day and evening. So I'm just going to have a few introductory remarks, and we'll get to your comments. I thought we'd start with this quote from Louis Brandeis: "In differentiation, not in uniformity, lies the path to progress." And this, to me, embodies Eric's academic and research path and course of action over the past 20 so years. Differentiation lies the path of progress. Some of you in the room have heard me talk about Dr. Dacey as a great multiplier. There's a book by Liz Wiseman that talks about how leaders who have this quality, this multiplying quality, can have such impact on their organizations and their communities. And I would say with Eric, as I thought about Eric, what is he? And to me, he's the great differentiator. The definition of differentiator is someone or something that enables a difference or a distinction to be made. And I can't think of a better term or ethos than a differentiator than Eric Leuthardt. Now, Eric was born in Boston and was there for a brief period of time, and then spent some early toddler years in Stuttgart, Germany, with his family, and then he moved to Cincinnati, where most of his upbringing occurred all the way through high school. He then came to St. Louis, not at the right university, but he did come to St. Louis, and got a biology and theology degree at St. Louis University, a BS, and then went to the University of Pennsylvania for his MD degree. He then came back to St. Louis, to the proper university, Washington University, for his residency training. This is where Eric and I first met. I was a first-year faculty member when he was a chief resident at the time, and I knew there was something special in Eric very early on. I knew I was, out of my league in terms of IQ and vision. And he then left after chief residency to do his epilepsy and spine fellowship at the University of Washington, and then Dr. Dacey recruited him back very smartly back to Washington University in 2006. And one thing I'll mention is during his residency training, he had a very important postdoctoral research fellowship with his mentor, Dan Moran, who's subsequently become a very, very close friend and mentor and collaborator for these 20 years. And I think that was the time where the two of them really set the foundation for what you're going to hear from Eric later today in his comments. In terms of his career arc, he started in 2006 as an assistant professor, and he and Dr. Dacey started the Center for Innovation in Neuroscience and Technology, or referred to around here as CENT. And this has been absolutely transformative at Washington University in the neurosurgery department, within engineering, as collaborations often included the engineering campus, and developing numerous neurotechnologies and neuromodulatory strategies to address a disease. He then became associate professor in 2011 and then was promoted to professor in 2015. A year later, he started the Brain Laser Center, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this, but suffice to say that Eric is absolutely a world famous and innovator as it relates to laser treatment, minimally invasive approaches for treatment of things like high-grade gliomas, epilepsy, and other things. He actually did the first FDA-approved laser treatment in the United States. We'll hear more about that. And then more recently, he's been very involved as the head of our Division of Neurotechnology, which we created in 2019. And this year, in recognition of all that he means to the department as it relates to innovation and others and leadership, he became the vice chair of innovation. In terms of academic accomplishments, he's had innumerable federal grants, many from the NIH as listed there, also grants from the NSF and from the Department of Defense. He has over 200 peer-reviewed publications. He's a sought-after mentor by grad students, postdocs, and innovation fellows. He has an H-index of 90, and to many of you in the room that you need some context. For a neurosurgeon to have an H-index of 90 is really extraordinary. I looked up some of the most famous academic neurosurgeons, and it took quite a while, but you find a couple that are higher than that, all of whom are at least 10 years older than Eric. So I think he's well on his way to being probably the most highly cited and impactful neurosurgeon of his time. And this I know is right. He has over 1,900 patents at this point, and this is the highest of any U.S. neurosurgeon. He's a serial entrepreneur, at least 8 startup companies. These are 6 of those that have come to a certain level of fruition. He is a serial award winner, and I'll just name a couple. He's a Technology Review Top 100 Young Innovator by MIT in 2004, the James O'Leary Prize for Outstanding Neuroscience Research in 2007, the National Academy of Inventors. He was elected into this prestigious organization in 2017. He won the Chancellor's Award for Innovation and Entrepreneurship in 2017. He was given the Washington University Distinguished Faculty Award in 2020, and the California Life Sciences Pantheon Award for Medical Device Designation for the Ipsy hand, one of his company's products that you'll hear more about during his talk. He won that award in 2021. He's also a novelist in his spare time, Red Devil 4 and Limbo. So if you haven't read these, they are available on Amazon. I'm sure he wouldn't mind you going up and picking up a copy. He's an influencer. He and Albert Kim have a podcast called Brain Coffee that has been very well received. And also he's an author and a playwright and an actor in something called Brainworks, which is a play, a theater of neuroscience. This play, the second iteration of this play, actually won an Emmy Award from the Mid-America chapter of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. So he is obviously extremely talented in a lot of different ways. Now I'm going to give you just a little bit of my own mind, how I was thinking about Eric when I was coming on as a chair in 2019, and it really comes back to this. And the Chancellor, I was at the inauguration. He had a lot of important things to say. The 3 things that I really zeroed in on were the 3 keys that he described in terms of building bridges for the future of this university in St. Louis more broadly, one of which really resonated with me with Eric. The first was maintaining and enhancing our reputation as a place of academic distinction. The second was providing educational access for students regardless of their background or previous opportunities, what became known as the WashU Pledge. And the last one was Washington University in St. Louis, also being Washington University for St. Louis, which became known as the WashU Compact. It was the first of these, and the way he described it during that speech, that really made me think about Eric. He talked about strategically investing in programs and people who are truly differentiating. And I couldn't think of anything better than Eric in terms of differentiating pieces of our department. And so with that, we really invested in Eric, and we really invested in neurotechnology and neuromodulation, and we created the Division of Neurotechnology, and it's been a complete home run. The vision that Eric put out was to build a multi-investigator research division with differentiating expertise in developing technologies that treat diseases by engaging with the nervous system. And you'll notice there that it's not treating neurologic disease because he's very quick to make sure you know that by modulating the brain, you can treat lots of diseases in the brain, the spinal cord, but beyond. So far, he's recruited or engaged and organized 8 primary faculty, those in the yellow boxes, as well as numerous other faculty who have adjunct relationships with neurosurgery, including the 3 listed in the red. He just moved in, I think, 2 weeks ago to new space in the Cortex building, first floor of the Cortex building. You see to the red where that's located. It's actually at the junction between the medical campus and the Cortex district, the innovation district, which makes total sense for the type of work that he and his division do. He has several areas of focus that he's going to expound upon during his remarks, and they're doing great. They have over $5 million in federal funding as of FY23, and we are predicting that that's going to continue to go up in the years to come. So I can't think of anybody else who is a bigger differentiator in neurosurgery than Eric Leuthardt. His impact goes way, way, way beyond WashU and St. Louis region. He is an international figure in this space. And I couldn't be prouder and more excited to congratulate Eric and honor him in this celebration today. So thanks everybody for coming, and congratulations, Eric. I want to thank and recognize his family, including his dad, pictured to the left, Helmut. To the right, his brother and sister, Luana and Mark. Mark is with you. Mark, I got to tell you, when I saw that picture and one other picture, and then you walked in at like 6'3", I know they weren't quite modern. And then a number of friends and family who are also included, and especially Leanne and Ellie and Hunter. Congratulations on what your father and spouse are doing. So with that, Eric, congratulations on being the Huang Endowed Chair. There isn't a book about a differentiator yet, but I suspect there will be, and if it is, you'll be the protagonist. And then lastly, this is a toast to you. Congrats.
So if I could ask Chancellor Martin to join me for bestowing the medallion. Eric, please come forward. You're supposed to come over here.
Go wherever you like. Eric, it is such an honor to be here today to present this medallion to you, to recognize all of your accomplishments in so many ways that you've touched so many parts of this university and affected positively so many lives. So the medallion reads on the obverse, the Huang Professor of Neurological Surgery, and on the reverse, Eric C. Leuthardt, MD, October 30th, 2023. Congratulations. We're in awe. Thank you. With that, we'll turn things over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am humbled and honored to be here tonight, to be named the Huang Professor. And I am so deeply appreciative of seeing all you here tonight, both in your presence this evening and in my journey through my career. I've had, in the last 20 years, the profound fortune of being allowed and given the mandate to be creative as a neurosurgeon. And I want to talk about some of those experiences, and hopefully I can provide some useful insights in this process that I've gone through and the things that I've learned. And so when I think about, when I talk to medical students, residents, co-faculty, about kind of innovation and creativity and more just like impact, the first question that I always say is, what's your vision? Where are you going in the future? And who are you? Because I think when you think about vision, the first place that you start is you begin with yourself. What are your values? What do you embody? And where is that going to take you in the future? Because then you work towards that. It's a clarifying exercise. And so really reflecting personally, who was I? And it goes before, being a faculty. It goes before a resident, med school, undergraduate. And actually, for me, it starts kind of actually in middle school. And that's actually not a picture of me, but it's an AI rendering. And I remember Mrs. Luby sitting down with me, and she identified the smart kids in class, and I wasn't one of them, because I was applying for a private school at the time, and she told me not to set my sights so high. And I remember thinking to myself, well, you know, maybe I'm not that smart, but I sure will work hard. And that lesson has stayed with me to this day. This idea that with our willpower, with our work ethic, we can be more than who people say we are, who we think we are, or what circumstances dictate. And so, fast forwarding, you know, a few decades, I think Mrs. Luby always had in mind that I have a power tool in my hands, but I don't think this is exactly what she was thinking. And so, and I think that also that's part of the reason I became a neurosurgeon. This idea that through deliberate effort and work, I could make patients more than their disease. And so, again, fast forwarding to when I became a faculty neurosurgeon. At the time, I was writing a lot of my ideas and my thoughts down in this blog called Brains and Machines. And, you know, one of the first things I wrote, and these words still stay with me, is almost kind of a mission statement for myself, or a higher purpose statement. And I'm just going to read it to you and kind of, you know, reflect on it. Vision for the future creates history. To determine the evolution and manner in which science, technology, and society will unfold requires vision. The ability to imagine what can be and work towards that goal. Without creativity, without passion, and without perseverance, we are lost to roam shiftless and blind like a ship without a sail in the night. And those words stay with me today. And so when I was starting my career, what was going to be my North Star? Where was I going? What was my vision? Because again, I did not want to roam shiftless and blind through the night. And so my goal when I started was this idea of brain-computer interfaces. This idea that we could have machines and brains interact, I thought was of fundamental importance for the field of neurosurgery and the way we could potentially treat diseases in a new way. But also, I thought that it was of fundamental importance to human evolution. And that whether it be 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years, it wasn't immaterial in the context of history that this is going to change our human species. And I still believe that today. And so having that vision really concrete in my mind, then if I'm going to have a meaningful social impact, I kind of had to work my way backwards. And so I really took a three-prong approach. Science, and for that I started my laboratory. Because for this audacious goal, I had to prove and show that these things were feasible. I had to do the science in a rigorous fashion. Economy. Beyond just this idea in the walls of academia, we have to create self-sustaining economic forces that allow that idea to thrive beyond you and your direct efforts. And finally, culture. It was the reason that I wrote the two novels. I wanted to bring people into the conversation. I wanted them to talk about this idea. I wanted it to be viral. And so I'm going to talk about each of these efforts in kind and some of the lessons that I took away from the experience. So first, and this is work that I did with my dear friend and mentor and colleague and buddy, Dan Moran. When he and I worked together, it's like two kids playing in the garage. And we started with this idea of electrocorticography. So when, again, getting on 20 years ago, when people were first starting to talk about brain-computer interfaces, they were talking about signals on the scalp or actually electrodes implanted in the brain. And where we started was with this physiology recorded from the surface of the brain. And it had some unique features that made it really appropriate for implantable brain-computer interfaces. Now, EEG, that could record signals that represented broad neural networks. And they were low frequencies, and so they had a certain utility, but these higher frequencies, which we refer to as gamma rhythms. These were high-frequency signals that represented smaller neural ensembles and were very rich in decoding the information coming from the brain. And so we did all sorts of fun stuff with this. And so, again, this is just one example, is this idea of decoding information from the brain. And this is data taken from a single electrode over primary motor cortex in a single patient who had electrodes implanted for the purposes of treating their epilepsy. And what I'm showing you here is what are called time-frequency plots. Time on the y-axis, time on the x-axis, frequency on the y-axis, and those color changes are how the amplitude changes. And so these patients would do what's called a center-out task. They basically move a cursor in the center of the screen to a peripheral target. And so in this case, from that single electrode, when they moved to the left, you saw that increase in amplitude. And when they moved to the right, you saw that decrease. And so if you take a multitude of those electrodes, and you take that information, you put it together, you can actually decode their intent to move, even before they actually moved. And so then, again, that's kind of decoding it, but now we can put it to action. Here's kind of an early example, epilepsy patient who now has to move that cursor. There's the joystick. He's moving that cursor with his thoughts alone. And at that time, 20 years ago, that was kind of considered newsworthy. Now it's kind of common parlance. And so, again, it gets at this, if you've got a big vision, you've got to take some concrete steps to make that vision more real, and that was one of the early steps. And this patient, he got bored, and he actually wanted to play video games. And so here he is playing Space Invaders. He's controlling that cannon. And again, 20 years later, it's still cool to me. I still get excited about it. But he's just using his thoughts to control that cannon on a video game. And so we went on to decode all sorts of motor movements. Finger movements, hand movements, arm movements, directions in space. And we also ended up decoding speech. We could decode the words that you say, either real or imagined, using these high-frequency gamma rhythms. We decode attention. Where are you paying attention? What are you paying attention to? How much attention? We could decode your level of consciousness, whether under anesthesia or asleep. And it was an exciting time through those really actually today. And so, again, just to show you some examples of that progression. Again, in 2004, we published our first paper. It was one of the early brain-computer interface papers, and we've seen an absolute explosion of publications. Again, getting at that idea in the first column, it's not just us doing it anymore. A whole bunch of people are interested in brain-computer interfaces scientifically. And so, our first publication, we basically played a game Pong with your brain. Super, super simple stuff, right? Again, that was newsworthy at that time. Then, just fast forwarding less than 10 years, these are some of our colleagues, and actually one of these was trained by Dan Moran. And here we have a spinal cord injury patient moving that robotic arm with his thoughts. You see him,
All right.
there you go. He gets to reach out, he gets to touch his wife's arm, or excuse me, his wife's hand for the first time since being paralyzed. And there's others. This is some of the work being done at UCSF, where now people are decoding your thoughts to allow a speech prosthesis for a locked-in patient. And these are great demonstrations scientifically. They prove the feasibility, but those haven't made it to patients yet. And so the next step is, as we think about brain-computer interfaces, it gets to that second point of attack. We've got to think about markets. And I also want to highlight this idea of the importance of constraints and how that's critical for innovation. And so again, we had done all this, we looked at these gamma rhythms, we've looked at electrocorticography, and we wanted to take this to patients. And so we started this company called Neurological. And the vision at that time, back in 2007, the vision at that time was to have this thimble-like implant in the skull where we could record these gamma rhythms and allow people to control and engage with their environment if they had severe motor disability. spinal cord injury, ALS. Now, if anybody remembers 2007, that's when we founded the company. Here's 2008 financially, right? And here we had this audacious, innovative, new implantable technology. And again, it was poised to potentially help people with spinal cord injury, 5,000, 10,000 patients per year. And investors at that time said, well, what about the FDA? And so we were engaging with them, and it was going to cost many tens of millions of dollars to get it through the FDA at that time. And that wasn't going to happen in 2008. So it really forced us to reset and rethink about the scale of how we wanted to do this. Both we had to achieve a larger impact, and we had to do it in a more cost-efficient way. Markets and constraints. And so as we reset, it was how can we have the biggest impact possible with brain-computer interfaces? And that's where it became very clear that stroke was the right way to go. 5,000 spinal cord injuries per year, 1 million stroke patients per year. And so that again, markets is really just, for me, it's a proxy for impact. More people, more impact, larger markets. Now, next was the constraint. How do we get to these patients? What are we going to do for them? How do we accomplish this? And so again, the dogma at that time was that one side of the brain controls the opposite side of the body. Now, and then in the setting of a stroke, that area is lost. It's injured. And that after 6 months, that function's not coming back. And so we had to really rethink and essentially go back to the laboratory and figure out how can we make a brain-computer interface work for these stroke patients. And so, again, I won't kind of go into the depths of these multiple histograms here, but we looked at our epilepsy patients and we had them do a whole bunch of motor movements. And one of the things we realized is that patients not only have contralateral control, they have what's called ipsilateral control. That one side of the brain controls is involved in the same side of the body movement. It looks like it's at a different frequency. It's a lower frequency. That means we can do it non-invasively. It happens earlier. It's in premotor cortex. And so we can now contemplate this idea of ipsilateral control, because basically, if you talk to a stroke patient, they may not be able to move their limb, but they can imagine it. They can try to move it. They just can't actually move it. And so, and where some of those signals are on the unaffected side of the brain. And so we came up with this idea of the IPSI hand, basically kind of a wearable, headset, computation, and output. Basically, the stroke patient thinks about moving their hand. They use that uninjured side of the brain to control that paralyzed hand. And so here's kind of what the system looks like today. Wearable headset that can be put on and taken off by somebody with a paralyzed limb. Computation now happens in a tablet, and that wearable exoskeleton. But it's more than just about giving them control, and I want to walk you through this. So, as I mentioned, again, primary motor cortex, premotor cortex, the planning area. And again, that sends signals down the spinal cord to nerves, to muscles. But in the setting of stroke, that area is lost. And it's important to highlight the hand. Whoops, excuse me. Shoot. It's important to highlight the hand because the hand and its many movements are richly cortically represented in the brain. And so it's the part of the brain, or it's one of the functions that's most robustly lost in the setting of chronic stroke. And so, but now again, keep in mind, we could pick up those signals, that intent to move that hand after the stroke on the uninjured side of the brain, kind of premotor areas, or ipsilateral premotor cortex. And so we could also, because we saw that these signals are lower frequency, we can detect them non-invasively. So basically, somebody wears a headset, as you saw earlier. We'll kind of get to that in the video. And importantly, we can pick up the signals when they're thinking about moving their hand. And also, and this is one of the keys with the brain-computer interface, it picks it up precisely in time. And so when it picks up those signals to move the hand actually moves. And that creates what we call Hebbian learning. Things that fire together wired together. And after they use that for multiple periods of time, over time, it's not just that they control that hand, that uninjured side of the brain eventually is no longer just planning the movements, it's actually facilitating doing the real movements. And again, nice video, but let's show some examples of that. Again, here's a patient who I got to know. His name's Rick. He's one of the earliest patients who participated in one of our clinical trials. And so you're going to see Rick try to pick up a marble. And this is what's called an action research arm test. Very standardized movements. And what he's got to do is he's got to pick up that marble and move it to the top of the cabinet. And in many ways, that is a heavy, heavy marble beyond its physical weight. Because in addition to that, he can't put his pants on. He can't get himself dressed. His wife has to help him a lot. So, and he's 4 years out from stroke. And being 4 years out from stroke, if you're greater than 6 months, they say it's not coming back. So now I'm going to show you Rick 4 weeks into using his Ipsy hand. I'm going to try to pick up that marble again. And not perfect, but he can pick up that marble. 4 weeks later, he flags me down. He says, Dr. Leuthardt, I just want to let you know, I can put my pants on again. And I want to say, and I tell this to residents, to trainees all the time, that was one of the biggest moments of my academic career. Because it was this moment when you had an idea and it affects somebody's life in a novel way that has the ability to scale to many, many more patients. That's one of the moments you live for. More than any paper, any patent, those are the moments. And so fast forwarding, that was the first FDA-approved brain-computer interface. It was given a breakthrough designation. And as Dr. Zipfel mentioned, it was considered the biomedical device of the year in 2021 by the Pantheon Awards. And I think importantly, wasn't a drug, wasn't a surgery. I'm a surgeon, but still not a surgery. It just fundamentally relied on having a deeper insight into kind of the cortical physiology of the brain and timing. Now, I want to the next lesson is this idea of thinking laterally. So the brain-computer interface that we made for stroke, it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a singular solution. And anytime you have an idea, I think it's absolutely important you think of how else can we use this for other things. Again, thinking laterally. And brain-computer interfaces are really a general approach to what I call networkopathies. This idea that there are distorted circuits in the brain that if we can use a brain-computer interface to couple this timing, that we can remodel those neural circuits to improve clinical symptoms. And so another way of describing this is what we call cortical sensory coupling. And I like to use kind of the two lighthouse analogies. You want a goal physiology. Again, for the Ipsy hand, it was that intent to move. And then you want a peripheral physiology. For the Ipsy hand, it was that opening and closing of the hand that led to sensory feedback. And when those two things happen concurrently, it remodeled the brain to a better state. And we can do that for other networkopathies. And this is work that I've been doing with Simone Haritonian. And the idea is, can we fix networkopathies associated with chronic pain? And again, it's pretty well understood that there's a whole host of nodes and networks when people are experiencing chronic pain that are distorted, that are non-functional, that lead to the perception of pain. And so first we had to find that first lighthouse, that goal physiology. And we were looking after this idea of biomarkers of not pain, like what represents your pain, but rather pain relief. What does it look like when your pain gets better? And so we studied both chronic pain patients and acute pain patients, or normal people who we could subject experimental acute pain. And we looked at, again, kind of a busy slide, these are EEGs and what are called topographies, and these colors are increases or decreases in specific frequencies. But the thing to draw your eye to was when we looked for the relief of chronic pain and compared it to the relief of acute pain, we found some very specific electrophysiologic signatures in the frontal lobe in these rhythms called theta rhythms. These are around 5 hertz, lower frequencies than the gammas that we were talking about earlier. And so now, and we also found, again, when we do the source localization, again, frontal lobes, that's in the frontal lobe and these midline areas. And when we looked at how that frontal theta power changed, that it linearly correlated to their degree of relief from that pain. That's our first lighthouse. Now, the second one is what's the important physiology we should be feeding back? Now I want to introduce you to the theta hand system. It's this idea that, again, we're looking at brain signals, we're doing computations, we're looking at those frontal theta rhythms associated with pain relief, and now we're coupling it to vibrotactile sensation. That's the theta hand system, kind of this thing that basically closets the hand with these vibration elements. And vibration is important because if anybody's banged their knee against a coffee table, the first thing you do is you rub it with your hand. It's this notion of pain gating. Vibrotactile and light touch gates or reduces sharp pain. And so if we can couple vibration with these frontal rhythms and do it over time, can we impact people who are experiencing medically intractable chronic pain? The answer is yes. So we just recently completed this clinical trial, and we showed that we could significantly reduce both the severity of their pain and the degree to which it interfered with their life. So again, that's this idea of thinking laterally. So brain-computer interfaces, we can use it on a multitude of applications, and these are just a couple. Now I want to extend this even further, in this idea of thinking in opposites. So if you've got a good idea and it seems to work for something, what happens if you turn it upside down? What does that do and how is it useful? And so now I want to introduce you to this idea of how brain-computer interface is the exact opposite. The other side of that coin is brain mapping. And with brain-computer interfaces, we were looking at these dynamic physiologies, precise in time, and all these fast rhythms. Now I said to myself, what happens if we look at the slowest rhythms, the absolute slowest rhythms, and how are they useful? As it turns out, these are the most immutable rhythms, the ones that don't change. They define our brain networks. Let me just show you an example of that. And that the slow rhythms that share a time series, these are ones that basically segment out different areas of the brain that are consistently sharing information. And so we can basically segment out and map different portions of the brain. Moreover, we don't need to do it with EEG or electrodes that touch you. We can do it with an MRI, where MRIs can show us these very, very slow metabolic changes associated with these very slow brain rhythms. And so now, historically, when people were looking at this, is that it took a long time to basically identify these networks, because you'd have to look at one spot and find all the other spots that share that same fluctuating slow signal. And that was challenging. And so this is work that I've been doing with both Josh Shimoni and a very brilliant MD PhD who worked in my lab, who is now a very brilliant chief resident, Carl Hacker. And so what Carl did is he worked on developing some of the earliest artificial intelligence techniques to automate that process. And so now it took many days to figure out these brain networks, we could do in about 15 minutes. And so we could create what are called these rainbow brains, where basically we could separate out the 7 canonical networks of the brain with 10 to 15 minutes of data when the patient doesn't have to do anything. They sit there, they lay there, they can even be sedated. And so that was transformational here at Washington University. We've used that technique in over 3,000 patients. We've validated in adults, we've validated in children, which is uniquely important because kids can't participate in brain mapping techniques in an MRI because they have to be sedated. We validated this against cortical stimulation, the gold standard in neurosurgery, and we've shown that it's better than classic task-based fMRI. And on top of that, we partnered with Medtronic, and we've now, where we've created these beautiful 3-dimensional renderings, so we can really see an individual patient's brain in its anatomy, where the lesions are, such as a tumor, and we can see where these networks are. But that was also the beginning, because in addition to kind of understanding brain networks and where they are relative to a tumor, we can see how they change over time relative to a tumor, and it gave us all sorts of interesting AI-based decision analytics. As an example, and this is just recently published, from the day you walk in with a malignant brain tumor, we can predict accurately to a 90 to 95% accuracy whether you're going to live 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. That can affect the decisions you make. We can predict before surgery how you're going to do after surgery. We're even doing some interesting things where, looking at normal people, we can determine the the age of your brain relative to your chronologic age. Do you have an old brain or do you have a young brain? And so, but I want to come back to that third pillar, because again, we've shown that brain-computer interfaces are feasible. We've shown that we can create something from a market standpoint that's feasible. But also, you have to bring in a wider audience. You have to bring people into the conversation. And this is where I want to talk about some lessons in this idea that creativity is a skill. Everybody has this skill. It's kind of like a muscle, and your mind is a muscle, and you should use it. And the more you use it, the better that you get. And so, maybe as a show of hands here are some papers that I've been involved in publishing. And if anybody in this audience has happened to read one, just give me a show of hands. Okay, a couple. All right, stop. You guys don't fully represent the community, right? And the point here is that whereas that these scientific publications and the knowledge that they've generated are important, but they don't receive a wider audience. And we've got to have a wider audience for our stuff to really get attention and for people to want it to become more real. And so you have to engage emotionally with people. And that's why I wrote those novels. I wrote Red Devil 4 in 2014, and I wrote Limbo in 2017. And it's not a Pollyanna story of how brain-computer interfaces are going to be great in the future. They explore the good, the bad, the ugly, the social implications of what we're doing. For instance, what happens when AI gets involved with brain-computer interfaces? What happens when your brain can be hacked? What happens if companies get involved and have malign intentions? These are things that we should think about, because the more we think about them now, the more we are able to mitigate those risks in the future. And I guess, putting that all together, did it have an impact? Well, I think so, because there's other people working on it. Mark Zuckerberg in Facebook, now Meta, is dedicating significant resources to creating brain-computer interfaces. Elon Musk, one of his companies that's recently invested over $300 million, is Neuralink, that is also creating brain-computer interfaces. And when you look at the brain-computer interface market, when we started Neurolutions, the market was 0. Now, the estimated market size in 2023 is over $2 billion, and in 10 years, it's estimated to go between 9 to 10 billion. So, am I responsible for all that? No, but I think at least I've contributed. But I think beyond when thinking about the books, I want to come back to that for a moment. Creativity, that wasn't just an advertisement. Creativity should be a goal in and of itself. Because you want to strengthen those muscles. You want to enhance that ability to come up with that new insight, to see something a little bit differently. And so, actually, I've always had a penchant for doing creative things. As a med student and as a resident, I was really into oil painting. Here's some of the paintings that are still hanging in my house. When it became no longer practical to use my dining room as a art studio, I started doing digital art, and here's some examples. And actually, some of my early digital renderings got the attention of this company called Vita, and so I actually got to turn that into a clothing line. So I've made shirts and handkerchiefs and tote bags, and a shawl, which I actually particularly like. But I would argue, again, that's been a joyous process. It's really been fun. But I'd say it's even more fun with friends. That creativity is always better when you're working with people. Again, some examples. Albert Kim and I, we love to wax poetic and talk about all things geeky and nerdy as it comes to neuroscience and neurosurgery. And that led to kind of natural conversations. It led to a podcast where I think people enjoyed that. But it led to what I would say is one of the hardest creative endeavors that I actually pursued, and that was BrainWorks, where Albert and I, we worked on 2 plays, and they were challenging. And they really pushed me to a limit. I'm going to play a brief a snippet of one of those plays just to give you a flavor for it. And so basically this last one, this was a play that I'm going to show you is from the second BrainWorks, and that play had 4 components. There was one that was around Alzheimer's, one around a tumor, one around epilepsy, and one around stroke. And I'm going to show you the one that's called Rinse and Repeat, and just to give you a flavor for it.
I'm your granddaughter, Dina. We're at home. It's 7 a.m. Can you eat your bran for me this morning? What are you wearing?
Clothing. Is that a crime now, too?
You only need 1 blouse.
I know that.
Then why are you wearing 3?
Nonsense.
Take them off.
No.
But Judge...
Don't you tell me what to do!
Why are you raising your voice at me?
Everybody's got to get angry now and again, especially when you're trapped.
You feel trapped?
You bet I do. Don't you?
Sometimes. Yes, Judge Evans, I feel trapped.
Maybe we can make an escape together.
Speaking of, I have to pick a rose for the table. Eat your bran, okay?
Wouldn't that be something? To escape.
Sadly, there's no escaping this for Judge Evans.
No. Alzheimer's is really devastating. It attacks the most fundamental working unit of the brain, the neuron. And without working neurons, reliable information exchange is impossible.
Now, wait a minute. Before we talk about what's going on with the judge, why don't we look at how neurons function in a healthy brain?
Absolutely. Neurons basically have 3 parts. The dendrites, which are the input, the cell body, and the axon, which is the output. Neurons have both an electrical and chemical way of conveying information. When a neuron activates or fires, it sends an electrical signal from its body down the axon. That signal is called an action potential. Once it reaches the end of an axon, the neuron releases a number of chemicals known as neurotransmitters. These small molecules cross over a cleft called the synapse, which forms a connection to another neuron.
A healthy brain is one where neurons maintain and strengthen existing connections and form new connections.
Unfortunately, this level of connectivity isn't happening inside the judge's mind. On a fundamental level, her neurons aren't working, connecting.
And that play, the goal of that was to span both the science, the neurons, the chemicals, with the very, very human element. That fear, that anxiety when somebody has Alzheimer's. And I think that's what we should have in our minds when we're trying to bring people into this conversation. We need to both kind of get them excited and intrigued about the science, but we should never forget the empathy of the human impact of the things that we do and the way the people are affected. And so, why do all this? Why write that play? I had to take a month off of work to remember all that stuff. It was 130 pages of text that I had to memorize. For me, it was the cognitive equivalent of a triathlon. I think one of the actors said, and I think this is correct, is that it's easy for an actor to act like a neurosurgeon. It's nearly impossible for a neurosurgeon to act like an actor. And that doesn't happen. So, but what I would argue is that you could ask the same question to a pro athlete. Why are you lifting all those weights? What does that have to do with baseball? Why don't you just play more baseball? Why are you running on that treadmill? Play more baseball. But similarly, when we pursue these cognitive things, such as being creative for its own sake, we are strengthening our minds to do different things. I think that's of fundamental importance for progress. And on this, building on this theme of creativity is better with friends, I think another learning is diversity is the lifeblood of innovation. The more different, the better. Whether it be how we look, how we act, how we think, because it's at that intersection of difference and respect that the best ideas are born. And so, it's in that theme that really represents the division of neurotechnology that I have the privilege of running. And again, as Dr. Zippel highlighted, the idea is that any hardware, software, technical process that engages with or monitors the nervous system to treat or diagnose human disease. Not neurologic disease, human disease. And so certainly within our division, we can create neurotechnology that has neurosurgical relevance. I've shown you an example for tumors. That's relevant to neurology. We're treating stroke. Psychiatry, we're creating implants to treat depression. I even think diabetes has a neurotechnology solution. And whether it's wellness or even pediatric things, the nervous system touches every part of our body, and we can potentially create solutions that have a broad impact. Now, within the division, there's also the Center for Innovation, and I'm going to talk about that in just a few moments, as well as being intimately connected and partnered to the National Center for Adaptive Neurotechnologies, that's led by Peter Brunner, CVICE, that's led by Mohammed Zayed, and the Barnes-sponsored Brain Laser Center. And again, it's about bringing people together. And so again, my mission, we're creating neurotechnologies, we're inventing things. We're translating them in the form of preclinical and clinical trials. We're identifying them. So if there's good ideas outside of our walls, we want to bring them here. And fundamentally, we want to deploy them. We want to get them to the widest scale possible. And the network of the people that we're bringing together, it's a broad and densely connected network, spanning the medical school, the engineering school, multiple departments of science, neuroscience, with this idea of, again, bringing people together creates the best ideas. And one, kind of mechanism that I love to talk about is our invention sessions. We hold regular invention sessions that consist of various different people, physicians or neurosurgeons, engineers or scientists, and representatives from industry. And I have what's called a 2-slide rule. Basically, physicians, I want to hear a problem that you deal with in the care of your patients. Engineers and scientists, tell me what you're excited about. It doesn't have to have anything to do with medicine. Industry, what are the areas and sectors that you're interested in for growth? And that necessarily leads to a nonlinear conversation where new ideas are born. And we've got a whole pipeline where we've got a whole number of themes where we have a number of invention sessions that create those ideas that we then rank and triage and evaluate for their ability to be protected from a patent standpoint, their impact to patients. And then we turn those over to our innovation fellowships, where it consists, that's led by a physician and an engineer, and as well as trainees, which includes undergraduate student engineers and residents. And we've trained over 100 CINT fellows at this point. We've got a wide network of medical device leadership, both academically and in industry, and our inventors span the university. And I want to show one example, and this is a technology called sonobiopsy. And this involves a multitude of people from neurosurgery, engineering, with a special shout out to Huang, who's an absolute tiger in pushing this technology forward. And so, again, what's the problem? What is the problem that we're dealing with? Well, when we think about evaluating the human brain, historically we've used MRIs to look at the anatomy. Where's the tumor? How big is it? I've shown you some where we're using advanced techniques to look at function. Where's function in the brain? But these days, currently, if you want to understand the brain from a molecular standpoint, I've got to stick a needle in it. I've got to take a piece of tissue and I've got to send it for analysis. And that, to me, seemed like a problem. And so we came up with this idea of sonobiopsy. And so historically, you stick a needle in the brain to get tissue, whether you want to find out what's going on with a brain tumor. But what if you could replace that needle with sound? Focused ultrasound that could very precisely alter the blood-brain barrier. Now, historically, people have used it to let stuff into the brain, but we became really interested in getting biomarkers out of the brain and into the bloodstream. And so once it gets into the blood, that instead of putting a needle into the brain, you just draw blood. You put a needle into the vein. And so I'm actually happy to report just today, the press release was released, we just got FDA breakthrough designation. So we're going to make this happen. Now, I've talked to you about what I consider a lot of successes, but I also want to emphasize one of the fundamental learnings is that failure is a gift. Failure is that element of reality that's telling us we have something more to learn, and it's guiding us to do better. And so I want to show you one failure and how it had an impact. So again, invention session, what's the problem? Well, when we do brain surgery, we have to make large incisions in the scalp, and I got to make large holes in the skull. And that's actually hard on patients. So could we basically get a tumor out with a small hole? And so we created this thing called a tumor resection device. Again, not a creative name. And it was this idea that we could have kind of this tubular system that had these tines that could both cut and cauterize the brain, so we could take out segments of the brain or tumor through a small port. And let me just tell you, so in my lab, we had some of the best innovation fellows working on this, and it looked like something out of the zombie apocalypse, where we were blowing up all these like brains that we'd get from like the slaughterhouse, and it didn't work. But what did help is that a year later, I was at this conference, I think around in 2009, 2010, and there was this company, Monteris, and again, their technology wasn't even FDA approved at that time, and they had these laser probes that you could insert into the brain and heat and kill tissue. And so basically the idea was, through a small incision, several millimeters, you could insert a probe that you could robotically control in an MRI scanner, and you could control that laser probe to heat and kill tissue. And this was a game changer. I was like, that's it. That's the solution that I was looking for. But I wouldn't have recognized that had I not made the the failing tumor resection device. It was called the TRD, but we came to call it the turd, because it didn't work. And so, but that worked. And so we did the first FDA-approved case back in 2010, published it in 2011, and the field took off. We've transformed how we do neurosurgery. This is a fundamental pillar of treating patients with brain tumors and epilepsy. And it wouldn't have started, I wouldn't have been involved in it had I not failed. Failure is a gift. And let me finish with what I consider the most important lesson. People are everything. The reason we do this is to make people's lives better. The way we make it happen is through the relationships that we have with people. People are the driving force, not the money, not the technology, not the walls and the buildings. It's people. People, people, people. I would not be here talking to you today if it was not for Dr. Huang and his family supporting this absolute honor that I'm receiving. The work that I've done would not be possible if it were not for my mentors and friends. Dan Moran, who trained me in biomedical engineering, Guy Jenin, who trained me in mechanical engineering, has been and both of those two have been a staunch supporter of our cross-disciplinary efforts. Ralph Dacey, a father figure to me and a mentor. He trained me how to be an academic neurosurgeon. Greg Ziffel, a friend who's taken my career to the next level. The Department of Neurosurgery, my friends and colleagues, other neurosurgeons, the residents who do all the work every day, all day and all night, the nurses, the staff, they are the ones who are the driving engine that gives us the mandate to do these things. The people in my division, each of whom could be standing here today telling you about the amazing things that they do. And I get the privilege of working with them. My lab, the people that I've trained, the people that I'm training right now, my lab is my happy place. It is a joy. My graduate students, they teach me far more than I teach them. And there's a fundamental joy of pursuit of knowledge with the idea and the North Star of having impact. It is an absolute pleasure to have my laboratory. My scientific and clinical collaborators, also known as my friends, who, again, have such high level, and I get to engage with them on so many different ways. It's a privilege. Also, the business and corporate leaders who I have the privilege of working with, the CEOs of the companies that I've started, the venture capital partners. These are the people who've taught me so much about this whole different universe of how we take ideas and get them to the real world and how we get them to patients. The unsung heroes of my life, Megan, Juliana, Megan, and Mary, these are the people who kind of make the engine run in my personal life, in my business life. Megan knows my clinical mind better than anybody else. Juliana, who's the program manager for the division, she kind of herds cats with an extraordinary social grace. Megan Goldberg, who plays the Tetris schedule of my life. And then Mary Amon, who handles the business aspects of the department and really just makes things happen. Thank you to all of them. Also the OR nurses, the ICU nurses in Barnes Hospital. Again, they are the unsung heroes. They deal with patients and care for patients every day, every moment when we're not there. And I think finally, the ultimate North Star are the patients. This is the reason that we do what we do. This is Brad and Sarah Eastman. Brad was a patient of mine for 8 years. He was the inspiration for the first Brainworks play. And he embodies the fundamental truth that we have something to learn from every patient. And he taught me volumes. It was a joy to take care of him. He was a friend. My family. I want to finish by thanking my family. Well, Aaron, I am so lucky every day. When you came into my life, it was like a cool drink of water to my parched soul. Thank you. And to my kids, I'm a proud daddy. I love you very much. And to my brother who came to visit from Germany, I couldn't ask for a better brother. And to all of you tonight, thank you. I'm fortunate and I'm blessed. Thank you.
Great book. Really great, Eric. You know, you could be a playwright. Let's all enjoy the reception outside. And once again, Eric, we need you for a few photographs, but fantastic work.